The male loneliness epidemic is fake. You men are just horrible people and nobody wants to be around y'all. Any general issue that men face, I promise, you can trace it back to toxic masculinity. The reason why men feel like nobody cares about their feelings is because men are socialized into believing that emotional vulnerability is a sign of weakness. A lot of you men are lonely because you don't see women as equal peers and you view men as competition. Nobody wants to be around that person.
Funny thing happens when you hit your 40s and 50s. Tons of your friends get divorced. It's that 20-year hump, the kids are leaving home, and the good marriages maybe stick together, but the ones that are just duct taped tend to fall apart. Then, of course, we had a pandemic, which pushed some of those fragile relationships right off the cliff. So I currently have tons of divorced friends. And there's something that I recently noticed about my divorced friends. There's a huge divide between the men and the women and how happy they are. And by the way, I do manage a couple of divorce groups and work primarily with divorced or divorcing clients. So I probably hear the conversations of more divorced people than anyone in the world, except for maybe like divorce attorneys. First, I want to talk about my divorced female friends. Now, we're just going to take for granted that everybody, male or female, when you get divorced, goes through a grieving process, usually hits some type of rock bottom until you start to snap back to life again when you create a new normal. So we're going to skip past the grief of divorce and start with the new normal. My divorced female friends, once they get to that point where they have their new normal, well, some of them may struggle financially, myself included, and especially if they've taken any time off of work to raise babies or whatever. For the most part, my divorced female friends are extremely satisfied with their lives. A lot of them feel like they're catching up on things that they weren't able to do while they were married and having kids. And they have this attitude of exploration and curiosity. A lot of them are like traveling around the world, or maybe just across the country, or maybe just across the state, depending on their finances, with our other gal pals and visiting grandbabies, learning new hobbies. And a lot of them have had to move out of their homes during the divorces. And so they're really nesting and like either remodeling or redecorating their new tiny spaces. While some of my divorced female friends are frustrated with dating, saying that it's really hard to find a good guy, for the most part, they all have really satisfying dating lives. And many of my divorced female friends find what we call our upgrades within 3, 4, 5 years of their divorces. My female friends, for the most part, are very satisfied with their role as parents, if they still have younger kids at home, or their relationships with their older kids, if kids have already moved out and gone on and started their own lives. And a lot of them express being able to find greater balance as a mother once they have ex-husbands having shared custody, which allows them to have freedom of time that they never had when they were married and raising kids. I was on the phone with one of my besties, Beth Magnetic of Mormon True Crime, the other day, and we were talking about how much freedom, autonomy, and purpose we have after our divorces than we ever did when we were married and raising kids. And I hear that echoed a lot, especially in post-religious divorced communities. While my divorce at the time was very painful, I would give it a 10 out of 10 as the single best thing that has ever happened to me in my life. The same is not true of a lot of the divorced men I know. What I hear from a lot of my divorced guy friends is that they are lonely and overwhelmed. Now, a lot of them have more money than they ever had before because even paying alimony and child support, that ex-wife is taking up a lot less of their income than she used to when she had free reign over all of the money. A lot of guys I know, they didn't learn how to cook and clean. They weren't super active in raising their children, and they don't know how to do a lot of the basic things around the house. So I constantly hear from them how frustrating it is to be a working dad and a homemaker all wrapped into one, and how perpetually exhausted they feel. Also, in general, men tend to have less close friends than women. A really sad survey in 2021 showed that 15% of men say they have zero close friends. That was an increase of 12% from 30 years ago. So 30 years ago, only 3% of men said that they had no close friends. Now 15% of men say they don't have a single friend. Where the greatest difference comes in between men and women in my circle of divorced friends is in satisfaction with dating post divorce. And I hear from my guy friends frequently about being ghosted and blocked and thinking that they had really great chemistry and amazing time on that first date, only to never hear from the girl again. Now, I know that my observations do not reflect everybody out there. There are certainly men who are much happier post divorce than they were in their marriages and are having fine times raising their kids and dating. And there are women whose lives are just completely unraveling after their divorces, and dating, sex, and the whole thing is a disaster. But in general, there's a male loneliness epidemic on all fronts, and women are choosing to be single and thriving post divorce, according to all data and research, except in regards to their finances. And it kind of makes me wonder where the difference is. So I'd just like to share a little bit of my experience. In between my divorce and when I met Kevin, I dated a ton. Almost 100 dates, some of those with the same men, but lots of dating. I had been married since I was a 20-year-old little Mormon girl, and it was just fun to have company on the weekends. Sometimes a date was just coffee, sometimes it was a short hike, and then I'd go to dinner with somebody else in the evening. But I dated a lot. And 99.999% of the guys that I went on a date with were horrible human beings, even just on one little date. First up, most of the guys just wanted to get me in bed, which gets old after a while. Next up, I had tons of men on our first date who spent most of the time talking about how much they hated their ex-wives and what a psychopath she was and how she thought they were crazy. Guys who never even asked me anything about myself, and a couple that I don't even know if they remembered what my first name was or ever knew what it was, who our whole entire date were just blah, 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 blah about myself, my career, my boat, my dog, my whatever. The controlling guys were just wild. I had one guy on a first date sit down at a table at a little fish taco restaurant in Gilbert, Arizona with me and say, "You would look so hot with short hair, like above your shoulders." My hair was like down here. Who says that on a first date? My God. There's the guy that I'm still talking about all these years later, the private school principal who introduced me to his kids on like the second date because he said that he just wanted to make sure that I would make a good mom. What? And there's the absolute worst human being that I ever dated, Sean from St. George, who is this internationally acclaimed trainer and author and millionaire, whatever. I go to St. George from Phoenix to see him. I get to town after a, I don't know, 10-hour drive. I don't remember how far it is to St. George. I'm exhausted. There's a snowstorm. I don't drive in snow. I'm from Arizona. I'm a broke, single mom. And when I walk in his door, he says, "Hey, I'm going to cook steaks. Let me fire up the grill. Will you run to my fancy schmancy rich people's grocery store down the street?" And then he gives me a list of $120 worth of stuff, which overdrew my account, which gave this broke single mom overdraft fees for days. And after I drove 10 hours to get there, after we ate, he fell asleep on the couch in front of an Oklahoma football game. I remember going home the next day and him saying, "This was such a great weekend. I had so much fun," and me thinking, oh God, no.